the brain in particular uses the ketones. So the ketones are able to cross the blood-brain barrier and be used as that fuel. It's tricky. It requires a tremendous commitment level for a finite period of time. We don't want to live forever on a ketogenic diet unless you have seizures. So keto was originally designed to help treat seizures.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. And so unless you suffer from this condition, I don't recommend living 100% of your life in a ketogenic state. Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your health coach and host, Jenn, here with you every week for wellness without the weirdness. Joining me today is Tracy. Tracy was here, I don't know if you remember this, our 1-year anniversary episode. Tracy interviewed me for that one. So not a totally new voice unless you're a newer listener. So welcome back to this side of Salad with a Side of Fries.
I am so happy to be back. And I remember that interview because it was really, really fun. And I am so happy to be back and so happy to see how amazing the show has grown. And I was actually able to be at your live event, which was super fun. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, well, and Tracy and I do a lot of work in podcasting together. So, thrilled you're here for this too. This week, though, is not so much your wheelhouse compared to our usual conversations. So today...
Right. We're usually talking about produce your podcast, but not what we're talking about today. But that's okay because it's fun for me to talk about something different.
Good. So today we're talking about metabolic flexibility. So not to put you on the spot, but when I said that to you, what was your first thought?
Well, my first thought was, I wish my metabolism had a little bit more flexibility to it.
True. Don't
and
we all?
If there's a way to make that happen, I'm in and I'll show up for this.
Amazing. All right, well, that's what we're going to talk about. So essentially, though, metabolic flexibility is the body's ability to use different sources of fuel depending on what's available. So essentially, it's the body using sugar or glucose or fat as its source of fuel. And in an ideal scenario, the body's able to adapt depending on what's available, and it might go back and forth. So we'll talk a little bit more about what it is, why it's helpful, and then to answer your question, right? How do we support this ability so that we can go to flexibility from rigidity?
Okay, I'm in.
All right. Super quick. We have to tell our members what they're getting this week. So members, your recipe this week is perfectly seasonal for fall, a whole food, plant-based recipe for kale and butternut squash salad with quinoa. And I have to tell you, I know, right? And the dressing, by the way, is so delicious. Make extra to keep in the fridge. Then, in addition to the recipe, because it's the third month of the quarter, it's time for your quarterly live Q&A. Now, Tracy, you were at Salad with a Side of Fries Live. People loved the community part of the event.
And ask amazing questions, too, that were helpful for everybody to hear the answers to.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to do for this members Q&A. We're going to do it as a group. So I have 2 dates so that you can find one that accommodates your schedule. So if you're listening the day this goes live, there's one tonight. And then there's one more toward the end of the month. So you still have time. All those details will be in your email on Friday for the one at the end of the month. So if you want this recipe or access to this live Q&A for everybody on Zoom, doesn't matter where you live this time, go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries. For just $10 a month, you get weekly recipes, a monthly article or tool, extra discounts from me and our partners, plus access to live Q&A sessions. It's a total deal. I say it all the time. It's a steal when you take advantage of the full offerings because you're going to save far more than that $10 cost. It's seriously a no-brainer way to show yourself that your health is a priority. Plus, being a member supports this podcast and this community so we can continue to bring you new episodes and experts every single week. 5 years and counting. Wild. All right, so here's the deal. Remember, you're going to go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or just click the link in the episode notes. Way easier. Once you're there, you click support now, enter your email and payment info, click subscribe, and you're all set. You're going to get this week's recipe for the kale and butternut squash salad with quinoa and access to the members-only live Q&A sessions this month. Okay, Tracy. So we defined metabolic flexibility as the ability for the body to adapt to use the fuel that it has available. So if we are eating more carbohydrates, if we are eating more frequently, we tend to be running on glucose. If we eat fewer carbohydrates, more protein, more quality fat, right? And by fewer carbohydrates, I mean quality carbohydrates for the ones that we have, right?
So not the bread bowl at the pasta dinner.
Right, exactly. And we'll go through more of the nutrition choices that will support metabolic flexibility, but just to think about where you might be right now, right? What are your food choices on a regular basis? Which bucket are they falling into? Can give us an idea of whether we're metabolically flexible or not, or whether our body is mostly burning carbohydrates or glucose, sugar, or whether our body is burning fat. Now, truthfully, we don't want to live 100% in either place. We want the flexibility. We want to be able to go back and forth because if you think about like caveman life, that's survival, right? Our body's ability to adapt is survival. And when we see always in the glucose burning, we also see a lot of fat stores often building up on the body. And metabolic inflexibility or rigidity, right, that we're not getting to this place. But inevitably, this often brings up the question of like, well, how does this play into metabolism in general and then metabolic health? Those were definitely going to be your questions, weren't they?
Absolutely, 100%. Those were my questions.
Perfect.
I was still back on the pasta bowl and the bread basket. But yes, I had those questions too.
Okay. So metabolism is our body converting food into usable energy, right? Many people think that metabolism is sort of like a static state, but it's not. Sometimes it can be more or less efficient. We talk about it all the time on the show, on Salad with a Side of Fries, that muscle dictates metabolism because muscle is metabolically active. Muscle burns fuel. Muscle requires fuel. So essentially, the more muscle we have on our body, the more fuel we need to sustain that muscle. So metabolism also includes not just what's needed to fuel the muscle, but literally every cell and chemical process in the body. And so metabolism as a word encompasses how we convert fuel to every source of energy for every cell, right? What can end up happening? Well, let me do metabolic health first before we discuss what happens if we're not metabolically flexible, right? So that's metabolism. Metabolic health really refers to how well are all of the metabolic systems functioning. So there are 5 indicators of metabolic health. I feel like this should be a nutrition nugget. So maybe we'll do this also one day as a nutrition nugget. But the 5 indicators of metabolic health, physicians look at waist circumference, fasting glucose, blood pressure, triglycerides, high density lipoprotein cholesterol or HDL cholesterol. If all of these metrics fall within the quote unquote Western medicine normal range, then you are considered metabolically healthy. Poor measurements in 3 of the 5 constitutes metabolic syndrome. Essentially, right, if we are metabolically inflexible or rigid, it's a sign of dysregulation, impaired metabolic health, where we would probably see it in one of those 5 measurements. Does that make sense?
It does, but I was just curious, like, is that something you can evaluate on your own without having the test run by the doctor? Or, I mean, all of those sound very scientific in terms of evaluation. And I'm just curious if there's a way that you can, like, have a gut feeling about it or, like, monitor it on your own at home.
Yes, yes, yes to all. So those 5 are blood tests that are typically part of routine blood work. Well, no, I guess
Okay.
waist circumference is a tape measure, not a blood test, but
But that one you
Right.
can do on your own.
right, that one you can do. There are now a lot of home devices. We'll talk about some of them in a little bit. Like Lumen is one that I'm sure everybody has seen an Instagram ad for. And now that you're listening to this, you're of course going to see a million ads. I'm not
They're going to show up in your feed
right,
everywhere. Yeah.
right. I'm not endorsing the product, but essentially you breathe into it, you blow into it, and it's testing from your breath if essentially it's testing if you're burning ketones, which is a sign of burning fat as fuel versus burning glucose or sugar as fuel.
Gotcha.
And with that said, here are some of the things or signs that you might experience if you're metabolically rigid: fatigue, insatiable cravings, hangry, irritable, lacking energy, getting really tired immediately after a meal, brain fog. Oftentimes, like, again, this goes back to the blood work, but if you're seeing signs of insulin resistance, odds are you are metabolically rigid or inflexible.
So I'm thinking through this for myself, and I'm thinking this also sounds like my reaction to stress too. Like I don't really, I mean, other than the feeling really tired after the meal, I feel like that when I'm under, which running a business, as you know, and all the other things that we do can lead to a chronic level of stress, which
Yes.
ultimately feels like a lot of the same symptoms of what you're saying.
Yes. And I'm going to tell everybody, go back to our episode, The Mess of Stress. What happens when our body is in a state of stress is that systems in the body that are not critical to survival for the next 20 minutes of what the stress response is supposed to be, right? Fight, flight, freeze, supposed to be like 20 minutes, like up the mountain and back down of like run from the saber-tooth tiger, hide, breathe, we're good, right? Things come back to normal. So that's
pretty much my average Tuesday. Yeah.
Right. Except the challenge is like we never come down the other side of that, right? We're normally peaking in that stress response. And while we're there, like we end up with the next punch of our phone buzzing or the email coming in, right? So this stress response that was designed to be 20 minutes is now ad infinitum,
Yes.
And when our body is in a stress response, any body function not critical to survival turns off because like growing your hair and nails, burning fuel, your immune system, your reproductive system, like none of those things are important if we don't survive the next 20 minutes. So yes, you're exactly right. We're going to experience a lot of these same symptoms if we're living in a state of chronic stress because our metabolism has turned off. We are burning sugar to try to fight flight, right? I mean, that was such a great connection that like I didn't even make as I was putting all my notes together, right? But 100%, that makes total sense.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
For your ahas.
Thank you. I'm dead. So with that said, what are the benefits of being metabolically flexible, able to make that shift between glucose and sugar or fat? Certainly improved weight management, right? Because our metabolism adapts, improved energy levels, certainly a decreased chance of developing metabolic disease. And by the way, metabolic disease is essentially like one of the many precursors, or maybe it's not a precursor, maybe it's really just the comorbidity of every, disease state in the body. But healthy blood sugar levels, right? Consistent blood sugar levels in healthy ranges, improved sleep, improved workouts, overall energy, health, well-being, like all the things, really. There's no reason not to, I feel like. Right? You're nodding.
Well, I am nodding because I agree, but I also have a question, and that is
Yes.
like, how does skipping meals factor into this? Like, let's say you have like a super busy day and you do eat breakfast, but then it's, 10 hours later and you realize I forgot to eat lunch. And it's, like I'm just curious how that plays into it.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about this. Intermittent fasting is one of the ways to support metabolic flexibility. But I do believe that there's a process of getting to that place in time, right? Once we are in a place of metabolic flexibility, then that's not a big deal. Your body would shift to what it's burning in that window.
Well, I would think intermittent fasting, though, would be intentional versus like if you just get busy during your day and you literally forget to eat, or you just blow through lunchtime and
Yes. The reason why I say it that way is because I think a lot of times that happens and people go, oh, I'll just call it intermittent fasting. Right.
Yeah.
We've all done that. Right. Right. Tell me I'm not alone.
Feels good today.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It feels good today.
Right. So there is a piece of once we're in that place where we are metabolically flexible and you have days like that, it's sometimes called intuitive fasting. Although I would say a stress state is not quite intuitive fasting, right? But just like there's an evolution, I believe there's an evolution to getting from where we are to what people call intuitive eating. I think there's also an evolution of getting to intuitive fasting.
Interesting.
So your question is spot on. I want to shift into how we cultivate this ability in the body, right? What are the things that we can do to support this? Really quick, let's pause to highlight our partner for this episode. Big thanks to Layered Jewelry for supporting Salad with a Side of Fries. The modern woman is multifaceted, taking on many important roles in the various aspects of her life. Inspired by her own multi-layered life as a busy mom, trendsetter, entrepreneur, and influencer, Amber Reidinger McLaughlin set out to create a line of jewelry that lets women create their unique style and celebrate their own beautiful layers. Layered is luxurious and affordable, the perfect combination for the modern woman. Layered allows you to mix, match, stack, and layer pieces that make you feel empowered and beautiful. Each piece is handcrafted to be unique and exquisite just for you. So the latest collection for the fall is called Timeless, and it is exactly that. I'm obsessed with the bracelets. I love the Marissa. It's like 2-in-1 for $120. I know today we're talking about metabolic flexibility. Jewelry certainly isn't going to help with that, but it's not going to hurt it either. So
it might help with your stress.
Right.
It might help with your stress. And if it helps with your stress, it's going to help with your metabolic flexibility.
There you go. So I recommend take advantage of the 10% off and free shipping that you get for being a Salad with a Side of Fries listener. Simply text the word layered, LAYERED, to 844-947-4846. You'll receive the link and coupon code right to your phone. Again, simply text the word layered to 844-947-4846 to get this handcrafted, luxurious, yet affordable jewelry at 10% off plus free shipping. This is a toll-free number. Standard text and data rates may apply. All right, so how do we create metabolic flexibility in the body, right? And we're going to go through a handful of things. And most of the time, I'm like, pick one. This is the kind of thing where we kind of have to be firing on all cylinders. With that said, you might choose to start with one. Recognize that like the goal of metabolic flexibility will happen over time, right? As we put all of these pieces in place. And by the way, it's all stuff that we talk about all the time. So you're probably already on your way if you've been listening and implementing the stuff that we talk about on Salad with a Side of Fries.
But it sounds so fancy.
It does, right? So nutrition-wise, avoiding the standard American diet, also known as the SAD diet, standard American diet, SAD. And why is it sad? Because it creates disease, right? So we want to focus on, as we all know, go back to our episode Nutrition 101 from, I think it was the beginning of this year, right? Our macronutrients, protein, quality carbohydrates, which are fiber, quality fat, water, and our micronutrients are the vitamins and minerals, right? When we have those things in place, our body can do what it's supposed to do. But when we're eating processed foods, higher glycemic carbohydrates, foods that look like food but are really new to nature molecules, right? Devoid of nutrition. It sets us up for challenges with glucose and insulin and, again, allowing our body to do what it's supposed to do. So whole, real foods meeting those dietary needs. Now, you talked about intermittent fasting. So fasting is one of the ways that we can push the body a bit into using a different type of fuel, right? So if, in theory, the body is deprived of fuel that would create glucose or blood sugar for it to burn as fuel, and it needs to survive, the theory is that it would switch to burning fat as energy. So the concept of intermittent fasting is to do exactly that, right? If we have less insulin available, it increases the fat burning. However, if we are starting in a place of insulin insensitivity, or if we're starting in a place of metabolic challenge, I believe that that can sometimes exacerbate the issue. So the kind of fasting that I'm a really big fan of is finishing food at the end of the day, like 2 to 4 hours before bed, especially for women in menopause or perimenopause. 4 hours before bed is ideal. And then starting fuel again about an hour after waking up so that we can teach the body that it doesn't need to hold on to everything it gets as fat, right? So that fasting time includes our sleep time. And then over time, that can help with some of that insulin sensitivity. And then in time, we may have intentional intermittent fasting during the day where the body does switch into this fat burning mode, right? But it requires that we're eating well and lower glycemic foods to keep blood sugars in a stable range before that point. This looks like it's making sense.
It is. No,
Okay,
I'm
good.
totally tracking with
Okay,
you.
good.
I really am. No, and it's also fascinating too, because I didn't realize actually that there would be a 2-hour difference if you're in one phase of your hormone cycles. And then like that, if you are, like you were saying, perimenopausal, postmenopausal,
Mhm.
that makes a difference to when you should adjust your eating windows. I think that's very fascinating.
Yeah. And it's really connected to hormone balance and helping because everything in the body is connected, right?
Right. Oh, no, exactly.
And then the other piece of that is with fasting, and we talked about this. I did a nutrition nugget on autophagy, which is cell turnover, basically, almost like cell upcycling. And intermittent fasting, or really like intentional fasting, as you called it before, can be a tool for that. But what we see in a lot of that research, and I believe it's similar here, where we might actually be better off doing like a full day fast, like less frequently to really push the body into that state.
I would find that very difficult.
Me
I would
too.
have to be in a really specific mindset for that.
Right. And that's probably a sign that that's not our best move.
Right. I agree with that.
The other way, and this goes to the lumen thing before of like, breathing into that device. The other way that people push their body into a fat burning way or mode is with keto. Now, the idea of a ketogenic diet is to dramatically cut carbohydrates to push the body again, right? Because we know carbohydrates create more of that insulin, right? So it's essentially depriving our body of a macronutrient to push it into this other state of burning fat as fuel. What can happen then over time is the body creates ketones, and those ketones can be used. Ketones are essentially a side effect of burning fat as fuel. So fundamentally, I want to say in talking about keto, I am not the biggest fan of keto because I think it is incredibly challenging to maintain. I've seen a lot of people boomerang the other direction after keto, and most people sort of misinterpret it. And so there can be a lot of health detriment to trying to live 100% in a ketogenic state and potentially doing this in a way we're not paying attention to the quality of the fat that we're having, right? So essentially, a ketogenic diet keeps insulin low, which puts our body into using fat as fuel. The byproduct in the body of using fat as fuel is ketones. And why do we need the ketones? Because not every system or cell in the body can use fat as fuel. Your brain, while made up mostly of fat, cannot use fat as fuel. Your red blood cells cannot use fat as fuel. Your central nervous system cannot use fat as fuel. So what this means is that the brain in particular uses the ketones. So the ketones are able to cross the blood-brain barrier and be used as that fuel. So it's tricky. It requires a tremendous commitment level for a finite period of time, right? We don't want to live forever on a ketogenic diet unless you have seizures. So keto was originally designed to help treat seizures.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. And so unless you suffer from this condition, I don't recommend living 100% of your life in a ketogenic state. It can create gastrointestinal issues, kidney stones, slowed growth, high cholesterol, vitamin D deficiency. Like there's a lot of side effects essentially, right, of living 100% on a ketogenic diet. So that's not recommended either. Similar to what we were saying about intermittent fasting, where maybe we'd be served by, I wouldn't say regularly, I would say periodically fasting for longer. Potentially, we might be able to create some of this flexibility by periodically for maybe 2 weeks following a ketogenic diet. But we would want to make sure that we have a plan, some support, right? And we're doing this in a way that after those 2 weeks, we're not going to boomerang the other direction. And that again, just like we were talking about before with the fasting, that we're set up at the start for shifting into that, right? There's sort of like a ramp of things, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, no, it does. It absolutely does.
Okay. So that's the nutrition. I think we've beat that to a pulp, right? All right. Sleep. Sleep is probably one of the most accessible, effective ways to support metabolic flexibility. And conversely, lack of sleep can lead to insulin resistance in someone who otherwise has zero signs of health challenge.
Okay, so I'm a good sleeper. Like I might even fall to the default of using sleep as a coping mechanism. So I'm a good sleeper. But I know several people, especially like in the menopause phase, that have like the eyes wide open at 3 a.m. scenario, and then their brain starts going like crazy. So they use Ambien or Trazodone or melatonin or some sort of sleep aid, Tylenol PM or Tylenol PM without the Tylenol. So how does that affect the quality of your sleep? If you are sleeping, but you're using a sedative, does that impugn the benefit of the sleep for the metabolic flexibility?
It's a great question. So we'd have to look at some research on like the sleep cycles when you're on something like an Ambien versus melatonin. Like I'd have to look into it. I don't know enough about what that difference is, but I do think you're spot on to say not all sleep is created equal.
Right.
Right? Like even thinking about after having some alcohol, right? We might sleep.
That could be disruptive to your REM sleep.
Exactly. So we might sleep, but is it restful restorative sleep? Right? No, we call it passing out. Right? Right? I mean, call a spade a spade. So,
and then there's also people who will use CBD and maybe THC for sleep support and things like that.
From the research that I have seen on CBD, melatonin, and things like that, those are less disruptive to sleep cycles. Like I haven't looked enough at like Ambien and pharma impact on that. With that said, if our challenge is falling asleep versus staying asleep, those are generally signs of different things happening. So that's something we want to look at. Is our challenge falling asleep or staying asleep? And then to the point that we had talked about before of stress reduction is one of our other ways of creating metabolic flexibility. But in this piece with the sleep, what are we doing all day to manage that stress response? And there are some like botanicals and herbs and things like that that I'll sometimes use with clients. And we've done a nutrition nugget on ashwagandha. Like ashwagandha is one, holy basil. I'm trying to think of some others, but they're escaping me at the moment, where they can do a lot to support the physiological response to stress. And that can then in turn improve the sleep piece, right? So usually if the challenge is falling asleep, sometimes we can do things like these herbs. Calcium and magnesium together can help with sleep.
Chamomile tea, which I don't really like chamomile, but I heard that like it's like sleepy time tea.
Yeah,
those
calming
kind of
things. A nighttime routine. Go back to our episode, Sleep on It. We talked all about different nighttime routine things that we can do to help with that falling asleep piece and creating that environment for quality deep sleep. Then staying asleep tends to be more of that melatonin piece. So this is also one where like every day might be different, right? And we're going to experiment and we're going to figure it out. And that's okay too, you know? But I think that gives a good jumping off point, I think. And then, like we said, there's tons of episodes to go back to dig deeper into which of these ways to create metabolic flexibility you want to focus on, right? So then on the stress reduction piece, we want to build things into our days that start to chip away at that stress. So I sort of describe it like, do you remember that old poster about success where it was like the iceberg and then the water line, and the part of the iceberg above the water line, they're like what people see. And then the part below the water line is like all the work.
Exactly.
Right? I think of stress that way. The water line is our awareness of stress. And so it's there. It's building up, right? And we have this awareness level of the stress. And then just the peak of that iceberg is above that. So our objective is to try to chip away at the iceberg and bring the water line down. So even if we don't feel like we're stressed, right? Even if we aren't registering anything above that water line, we want to do some of the stress reduction techniques every day, regularly, to start to chip away at what's there, right? Like what's built up over time. Movement and exercise is a tremendous way to signal to the body. Because think about like that old run from the saber-tooth tiger stress situation. Well, running from the tiger, our breath getting more shallow, right, as we're running, and then we stop running and our breath gets deeper and longer, that cycle of, that experience between the movement and the breathing and the oxygen, right, all that stuff sends signals to the body of moving through the stress cycle.
So that's basically cardio then is what you're...
You can get your heart pumping and breathing with strength training.
True.
So the point is movement, right, as one of our stress reduction tools. And then exercise is also a tool for metabolic flexibility. So we'll talk about that in a second. But on the stress reduction front, movement, deep breathing, like we talked about. One of my favorite tools for deep breathing is because breathing deeper turns off fight or flight, turns on rest and digest, right? 3 deep breaths where the exhale is longer than the inhale sends signals to the body that the stressor has passed. And what better time to turn on rest and digest than before we eat? And habit stacking says if we attach a new thing to something that already happens. So could we get into the habit of we sit down? Yes, we actually sit down to eat, right? I remember I did a nutrition nugget once of fast food and how when we eat standing up, we're essentially like creating fast food, even out of something that has nutrition. So sit down, take a couple deep breaths, and then eat. Maybe doing some stretching, maybe setting, and I say this with all the humility in the world, maybe setting some boundaries on emails.
Yeah, like not multitasking with your phone in one hand and your fork in the other. You mean that?
Right. Or even just saying, hey, at this point in the day, that's going to wait till tomorrow.
Yes.
One day I'll
100%.
learn that.
Yes, you and me both. And let me know when you do, because I'd like to
You'll find out
match
because I
that.
won't be responding.
Responding to my emails. Okay, got it.
Right. But think about all the little things that you can build into your day to help chip away at that stress, whether we feel like we're stressed in that moment or not, so that we can start to make this shift and turn off that nervous system response that keeps us in that glucose burning state.
Gotcha.
Okay, so then exercise. Inactivity, sitting all day, is one of the leading causes of metabolic rigidity. So exercise then is key in controlling glucose levels, using up the glucose in the blood, the glycogen that's stored in our muscles, so that the body then turns to the fat for the fuel. So oftentimes we see endurance athletes have improved metabolic flexibility because they are moving for long enough to burn through the glucose, the glycogen stores to get to that fat burning. You don't have to become a marathon runner, right? Like, it's fine, but that's part of some of the argument for more endurance types of activities, right? The zone 2 training. We did an episode earlier this year, it was in February for Heart Health Month, about cardiopulmonary exercise testing. We talked about zone 2 training, right? What's your personal zone 2 for your heart rate? That can help improve mitochondrial function, right? And metabolic flexibility, because mitochondria, by the way, is the part of the cell that's burning fuel, right? That's the powerhouse.
So is the Apple Watch, like for me, riding my Peloton, for example, and I have it so it shows me what zone I'm in. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah.
Like it'll say zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and then the red, which is like.
It depends on what information you're giving it to determine your zone 2. Like, it's accurate as far as whatever setting it has for each of those zones and what your heart rate is reading.
Yeah, I feel like it's basically based on heart rate and it's taking it from.
But it would also want to take things about your body into account, right? What's your muscle mass?
Yeah.
What's your, right? So,
yeah, I don't think it does all that.
Right. So there's a piece of it where, like, unless it's only as helpful as the information it has. So is it zone 2 based on the heart rate that you're registering? Yes. Is that your personal zone 2? We would need more information, right? There's some you can Google on the internet and figure out how to calculate your zone 2. I did the cardiopulmonary exercise test, which was amazing, and I totally geeked out on it all. You guys can hear all about it. It was that episode from February. So that might be something that you want to do, you know. And by the way, I think for everybody, there's a discount in the episode notes to do that. So take a look for it. The other piece of all of this is with our activity to do the strength training, because what can happen, and we talk about it, where the body will lose muscle mass when we cut out whole food groups, right? In an effort to quote unquote lose weight. The key factors to ensure that we remove fat without losing as much muscle is eating quality and sufficient amounts of protein and strength training. So when we're looking back to those food choices, right? Because all of this fits together. When we go back to those food choices, we have to make sure that we're not unnecessarily cutting out entire macronutrients, and that we're giving our body what it really needs in order to maintain that muscle mass and not turn to its muscle for fuel.
Yes, definitely.
Right? You were asking about devices before. Okay, 2 thoughts that are coming to me at the same time. One more thing on the movement, back for the women who are menopausal, perimenopausal. So sometimes you will see online that high intensity interval training may benefit metabolic flexibility. It's really more about improving metabolic health than metabolic flexibility, right? And the caveat to that is, for many of us, especially menopausal and perimenopausal women, the body starts to experience that high intensity workout as stress, which is counterproductive. So endurance walking, right? Zone 2 cardio strength training can be our friend. We don't have to do the HIIT high intensity interval training workout in order to get to this place, but you're going to see that stuff promoted as how to do this. It's just not your only option.
Well, and I think when you're a type A driver like I am, you strive for that because you want the quote unquote payoff, but it's not really a payoff if it's detrimental.
Exactly. And so with everything that we've talked about, if how you're living and what you're doing right now works for you and you feel energized and happy and healthy, keep doing it. Like, don't let anything that we talk about in this episode take over for what you know to be true for you. Frankly, that's anything I'd say ever, right?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's the best life advice. In this moment, it's great advice, but I think it's also great life advice too, because there's so many things out there. You should do this and you should be this and you should just, but if it's not working for you, it's not going to be sustainable.
And there are pieces, there might be one thing from this where you're like, wait, that makes sense based on what I know for me. So I'm going to tweak this one thing. Awesome. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? If you know what's working for you, keep doing it. We don't have to throw everything out either in order to play with one new twist.
Right.
So then the last thing I just wanted to say about devices. So I mentioned the Lumen. There are other things similar where you blow into it and it's telling you essentially if you're burning glucose or ketones. And basically that's because when you're burning ketones, your breath is terrible. But that's a side effect of living in a ketogenic state. And then sometimes people will use a constant glucose monitor, which are becoming more and more popular now, to track their glucose. And that can be helpful. But again, we want to make sure that we have some assistance in understanding the numbers that it's giving us. And we do want our blood sugar to fluctuate. We want it to respond to the food that we're eating. We just want that to be within this sort of middle range. We want to avoid the extreme highs and the extreme lows. So you can use some of these tools, but again, I wouldn't outsource all of our thinking to any of these tools. Just like you don't have to throw out what you're doing now that works for you because we talked about something today.
Yeah, true.
Okay. We did a lot. Tracy, let's wrap this up. Thoughts? What's sticking with you? Where are you? Did I lose you anywhere?
No, I just really feel like for me that it was a lot of good awareness. And then I think my takeaways for myself personally are the clock of 2 hours before. And I it's one of those things, okay, yeah, I know you're not supposed to eat late before bed, but I have a tendency to be a late night snacker. So do I feel better when I don't do that? Absolutely. So I think understanding those parameters of 2 hours, 4 hours, depending on kind of where you are hormonally, I think is really, really good and impactful. And I think also too, just being really conscientious of the whole fight and flight scenario. And I love the analogy on the stress about how you still need to be doing stress reduction techniques, even if you may not consciously feel like you're in that fight or flight mode. I know my husband's constantly saying to me, I think that's just a reaction to stress. And I'm like, but I don't feel stressed right now. But it's because it's the long-term ramification I'm not taking into consideration. So I love that. And then my third one is I love the idea of attaching the breathing, for example, attached in that to eating, or I actually got in the habit of doing planks because I attached it to my post workout. And so it would be before I would quote unquote finish my workout, I would do a plank. And so that then became a habit. So I love that, that whole attachment of new behaviors to change a behavior, I think is really, really good. And I've seen it work for myself. So I know it does work.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. I think my final thought on this is this conversation does not mean that you need to do keto or intermittent fasting. I hope the takeaway is how many other ways you have to support metabolic flexibility. And
especially bringing up the sleep,
yeah.
Bring the sleep for sure. And I also love the conversation around the zone too, because again, I'm a person who wants to be a hard driver all the time, all day, all the time. And so a workout for me needs to feel like I'm accomplishing something. but it's actually could be counterintuitive.
Yeah, exactly. And so by that token too, consider where you are right now. If you are in a place where you're experiencing all of those symptoms, right, or quote unquote signs of metabolic rigidity, let's start with a progression of working toward whole foods, hitting our protein, fiber, quality fat. Let's work to get our blood sugar in these middle ranges. Make sure we have all the stress reduction, the sleep, the movement, right? All these other elements in place. And then we can evolve into a place where we start to experiment with some of the other things. You can be on your way to metabolic flexibility without the tools and the things and the diets and everything everybody's trying to sell you online.
Well, I feel like I'm more on my way to that after today.
Amazing. Check, check, check. All right. Let's preview our nutrition nugget. So on Friday, everybody, we're talking about OWYN. I think that's how you say it. OWYN protein drinks. So this is a listener submission. Shout out to Liz or Lizzie from Instagram. Thank you for sending this. So they are packaged single-serve protein shakes, and the name stands for only what you need.
Ah, love.
Yeah, but are they really? I don't know. We're going to look at them together on Friday in this week's bonus episode Nutrition Nugget. So be sure wherever you're listening now, click the follow or the plus sign, and then your app will alert you when the Nutrition Nugget is live for you on Friday morning. As always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideoffries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. Truly, I love nothing more than hearing from you. So send me your takeaways, your ideas, your questions. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your coach. Tracy, thank you again for being here.
Oh my gosh, I had so much fun in it, and I learned so much.
Oh, perfect.
It was exactly what I needed.
Amazing. And of course, friends, if you're not already, join our membership program by going to glow.fm/saladwithasideoffries. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, and most importantly, it supports your health. You'll get this week's recipe for the kale and butternut squash salad with quinoa and access to the members-only live Q&A sessions this month. So until next week, remember, metabolic flexibility is a sign of metabolic health. And the nutrition and activity we talk about all the time on Salad with a Side of Fries can support your metabolic flexibility too. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.